What are taglines and how should you use them? Check it out on this episode of How Not to Highline. Hi, I'm Ryan Jinkson. Welcome to my garage. Today we're going to show you how to use a tagline. A tagline is a less important rope that you drag across a gap so you can pull your webbing across without damaging it. Before we go on, let's stress that point again. You don't want to drag your webbing across a gap because, well, it's the only thing you're going to be tied to when you're walking across, and it's going to have a lot of force on it. So keep your webbing as pure as possible by using a tagline. Check out our other video on how to get the line across the gap, but in this episode we're going to go over on the tips and tricks on how to use taglines. Let's start with things you need to know to get your tagline across. Whatever tagline you use, flake it nicely in a bag or on the ground so it doesn't get tangled when you're throwing it or trying to walk it over to the other side. And if you do use a bag, it's nice to have the top clipped to a beaner, tied to the top of your bag, and to have the bottom accessible in case you want to pre-attach it to your webbing or whatever and tied off to the bottom of your handle there. You can tape a tagline like this to a rock and get 30 to 50 meters in your throw, but don't hit your friends with it. And be careful with small diameter ropes that you don't wrap it around your fingers, because when we tried to rig Vernal Falls the first time and we used a 2mm accessory cord, we finally got it across the river and the river grabbed it. Obviously we don't want to let it go, so we wrapped it around our fingers and it almost cut our fingers down to the bone. And one way to throw your tagline is to hang on to the top and throw your bag down the cliff. Now this can work really good if you're trying to throw it down, but if you're trying to throw it across something and it doesn't quite make it and it falls down the cliff, you're going to have a problem. And please be clipped in when you're throwing taglines. It's very important that you're not doing this near a cliff edge untied. You could lose your balance, the tagline might get caught around your foot, or you might just slip, fall, and die. So be clipped in whenever you're working around near a cliff edge. If you're going to walk this tagline around, do not clip into it, because if for some reason it wants to go, you need to be able to let it go so you don't get pulled off the cliff. Now that you have the tagline between you and the other side, what are some of the things you should know? So you have two different scenarios going on at this point. You have the stuff going on at the static anchor, which is the side that is not going to get tension, and then you have the tension side, which is obviously what's going to get tension and generally the easier side to access or where everybody's hanging out at. But here's some things you should know if you are on the static side. Whether you're pulling the tagline or releasing the webbing, it's nice to have gloves. For shits and giggles, let's pretend that this is my static anchor and I already have my tagline across and attached to it. Have I mentioned that you should be clipped in yet? Once the webbing's ready to pull across and it's under 200 feet, you can just start pulling your tagline over this way. If it starts to get heavy, you just clip it to the beaner right there and you pull it, and that Z-drag gives a little bit more friction so you're not holding all that weight in between pulls. Another nice trick is to have a bag available, and sometimes you already had your anchor in this bag, because you have all this excess tail that is just going to become a tangled mess if you don't keep it organized as you go. So now as I pull it across, I can keep it organized in my bag so it's easy to release it after we detension the line. Now let's pretend that I pulled this all the way across. Now this is going to be awfully heavy, so I want to clip it to something or lock it off so I can access these things one at a time. If I can't just immediately clip it off to the side, what you can do is do a half twist here and then clip it into this beaner, and then by doing that, it locks it off. Now if you're using a 6mm tagline, you can actually stick it in these rope grabs such as my micro traction here, and then you can clip that to your anchor, and then literally you don't have to hang on to this end while you're pulling it over. Keep in mind that this rope is going to break around 50 pounds, and if you really muscle your 2-to-1 pulley setup, you could possibly break your line. If you're crossing a pretty large gap, you don't want the tension side to be sending you unnecessary things like your anchor, your water bottle, a snack. Keep it to a minimum if you're going to use such a cheap rope. So what happens if your gap's so big that you had to tie two taglines together, and obviously your knot isn't going to go through this micro traction? What you have to do is hold it temporarily with something else. Here I have an ascender that I will attach it to, and then I'm going to release the weight onto the ascender, which is now holding all of the pressure. So now that my ascender is holding all the weight, I'm going to take my micro traction and manually move it past the knot and then reinstall it up there. So now that the knot's on the other side, I pull it until my micro traction now has all the weight, and I can take off the ascender. And now I can finish pulling over my tagline. So now let's talk about what goes on with the tagline on the tension side. Have I mentioned yet that you should be clipped in when working near cliff edges? This is my most minimal setup to send across. It's soft shackles on sew-in loops, and just the leash is the additional item in the system. Disclaimer: soft shackles on sew-in loops are not industry standard. In fact, most of the highlining community would frown upon this. So make sure you understand the risks involved with this before you go use it yourself. I like to clip my leash to the backup webbing or the bottom webbing because it keeps it on the bottom, so it won't rotate as I send it across to the other side. So if I'm intentional about keeping this pre-taped webbing flat, then it should be flat when we're all done rigging. If we're trying to send our webbing across a large gap, it can be difficult to try to send this over controlled and flat with all that weight pulling against you. So to reduce the weight of a line you're sending across, you Z-drag it. And ideally, you use a line slide when Z-dragging so it doesn't damage your webbing at all. When I was lowering out the webbing at the 960 footer at Taft Point, we had 5 line slides going back and forth because there was so much weight on the webbing. Even though we use the leash here as a counterweight, so in theory the webbing won't rotate, sometimes you have a bunch of twists in your tagline, and sometimes it's nice to add a swivel here so it can help keep your webbing flat. When the trip is over and you need to de-rig, what are the things you need to do? We're going to discuss tensioning and detensioning in another video, but if you slide over to the static side, how do you get all this back over to your friends? Now that I'm clipped in, I untie my leash and attach it to something over here. Now let's pretend that they already detensioned the line and I can pull over enough slack for me to undo my side now. So now you have to decide how much of this stuff you're going to send back over to them. If walking back around is easy, you might as well just keep as much on your side as possible and you carry it over there. Now if it's super sketchy to get back to the other side, then you're going to want to send as much of the anchor material and all of this as possible over to your friends. Because I kept my tagline organized when I pulled it over, now it's all in the bag ready to be sent back. So now I'm going to set up my tagline so it's ready and available for me to send over my webbing. Now if you're using web locks, you've got pins to pull, or in this setup you've got soft shackles to undo, and you don't want to try to hold all the weight of this webbing while you're dealing with that. So I'm going to attach this tagline to some part of my webbing, and then I'm going to lock it off onto this carabiner. So now that my tagline is locked off and ready to hold the weight of my webbing, I can undo my pin or my soft shackle, whatever I have here, and this is going to be able to hold any pressure that the webbing is going to put on it. And then when I get my backup webbing off of my master point, I put it on my new master point, which is the end of my tagline. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, but the point is you want to get everything on the tagline without having to hold all of it. Now that this is ready to go, and before you release it here, you're going to want to clip as much stuff as you decided that you're going to send back over. You can clip it to the leash, you can clip it to that point, you can clip it to tagline itself. And now that I'm ready, I just undo one loop of my clove hitch and it already has a Z-drag ready for me to send everything across. If there's just a lot of weight and it's just hard to hang on to this, you can just put another carabiner on you and add a little bit more Z-drag. Or even clip another carabiner up here for additional Z's until it's easy to lower out. So now we're pretty much done. Our friends have the webbing and they're pulling over the tagline all the way to their side. We're going to undo this carabiner and then have the knot in our hand, and they're ready to pull it across. Now before your friends pull your tagline tight, make sure you take any knots out of it so it doesn't get caught on anything, and then just have them pull it tight and then let go, and then they can just pull it in the rest of the way. So now you know how to manage your tagline while you go across the gap, how to pull your webbing over with it, and how to de-rig with it. And also, have I mentioned that you should be clipped in while you do all that? Well, the tagline process can be sketchy, therefore you shouldn't highline. Hey, don't be a dummy and go rig your first highline after watching a guy in his garage show you how to do it, but instead, make sure you go with somebody who knows what they're doing the first time you go out. But in the meantime, check out these other videos and don't forget to subscribe.